Hello everyone, I'm Brownfield Anchor reporter Brent Barnett talking to you today from Central Iowa. Joining us is Troy Bauer with BASF. Troy, thanks a lot for taking time to talk with us here on Brownfield.
You bet, Brent. Thanks so much for the opportunity this morning.
Tell us more about your work with BASF and just some of your roles that you have within the company.
You bet. With BASF, I'm a senior tech rep for the seed treatment group, and I work in the Western Corn Belt. So I kind of cover the states of Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. Those are the main states that I really work with.
We're going to really discuss soybean cyst nematode here today, as well as sudden death syndrome. And we want to discuss SCN Action Month first. Give us an overview of soybean cyst nematode Action Month.
Yep, so SCN Action Month is a partnership between BASF and the SCN Coalition, and really the purpose of this month is to raise the awareness of soybean cyst nematode with growers. It is the number one pest that soybean growers deal with in the Midwest.
Talk more about the details of what kind of impacts we can see with SCN.
SCN is a parasitic roundworm that can burrow in and cause damage on the soybean roots. And actually, the SCN Coalition just put out a really neat app called the Profit Checker that growers can go into the SCN Coalition website and dig into how much potential yield they may be losing from soybean cyst nematodes in their fields.
We continue to hear more and more about this pest. I think a big question for growers, how do they know they have it? Is it a visibility thing? Do they need to be scouting? What's that all look like for us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And since it's a microscopic roundworm, it's really hard to detect, but I guess what you can do is, number one, you can go out and soil sample your fields in the fall or in the spring before they're planted to soybeans and to determine what type of levels they have. The other thing they can do is they can go out and dig their soybean plants up, look at the roots, kind of carefully get the soil away from the roots. A lot of times you'll have to soak them in water because if you're very vigorous, the cyst on the soybean roots may fall off. But after you kind of wash off the soil gently, you can look at your soybean roots and see the cyst on the roots themselves. And they're about 1/10 of the size of a soybean nodule, and they're typically white or kind of pearly yellow. So they can actually see them on the soybean roots.
So let's just say you make that discovery. What do you do at that point if you're a producer?
Once you have soybean cyst nematodes, you need to develop a management plan. And with that management plan, there's a lot of good information on the SCN Coalition website, but oftentimes, number one, you need to rotate away from soybeans to a non-host crop is your best practice. If you're going to plant soybeans into that field, you need to plant a resistant variety. And there's a couple of different resistance traits out there right now. Typically, the one that's used is PI 88788, and that's in over 95% of the soybeans out there. There is another source called the Peking source that works really well, but it's not in as many soybean varieties. The challenge that we have is with the PI 88788 source cyst resistance. Soybean breeders have been using that for 30 years now, and as with anything that you keep throwing the same management tool at it, you'll develop resistance or increased tolerance. And that's what we're starting to see with soybean cyst nematodes. They're starting to reproduce more and more on PI 88788. So in addition to utilizing a resistant variety, oftentimes we will recommend a seed treatment that has activity on soybean cyst nematodes, such as Olevo.
Like we mentioned, we're going to really hit on the correlation between soybean cyst nematode and sudden death syndrome. So with SDS first, can you give us a background on what SDS is?
SDS is caused by a pathogen, Fusarium fragiliforme, and we don't really understand the mechanism. Scientists have been studying it, but whenever you have soybean cyst nematodes, SDS becomes exacerbated. It's a much worse problem when you have those two together, and that's why it's really important to manage both SDS and soybean cyst nematodes. Because when they're together, it makes SDS worse. And there are a couple of the major pests that soybean growers deal with in the Midwest.
So are we seeing SCN and SDS kind of go hand in hand throughout the Corn Belt then?
Oftentimes, as growers continue to produce more soybeans every year and they continue to replant soybeans, those problems will continue to get worse. So it's really important to manage those two together. We kind of talked about the management strategies for soybean cyst nematodes. For SDS, you really need to plant varieties that are more tolerant of it. And that will get away from the foliar symptoms, but it really starts out as a root rot below ground, and that root rot will lead to reduced yield as well. So anything you can do to reduce that root rot is going to help your yield. And then if you get the foliar symptoms, which is not a direct cause from the pathogen, but what that pathogen does is causes a toxin, and that toxin moves through the vascular system and causes necrosis in the leaves, and that's when you get really drastic yield loss. So and unfortunately, the only time you can take management strategies towards SCN or SDS is before you plant or at planting time. So you really need to plan if you have those issues in the field.
That pathogen for SDS, why is it so aggressive?
So SDS pathogen is very aggressive, and oftentimes it's exacerbated by the soybean cyst nematode. But once it's in your field, it's going to be there forever, just as SCN is as well. And so once you have them present, you really need to plan to manage both of those pests.
I know you've hit on some management for SDS. Again, what are some of those first signs to look for?
So a lot of times what I'll hear from growers is, I've been growing soybeans for a number of years and I've kind of hit a plateau in yield and I can't really seem to overcome that. And so that's when the growers need to go out and start scouting in their fields, digging up some plants, looking to see if they have soybean cyst nematodes, looking to see if they have some rot on their soybean roots that may be caused by SDS, and that's a lot of times what's causing that yield plateau. So you need to implement management strategies for both of those pests and use an effective seed treatment such as Levo, which has been proven on both of those pests.
Sure, so like you said, controlling both, that kind of becomes a big priority then.
Yeah, you really need to manage them both together because they are such important pests for growers. And so if you have an effective product such as Levo that's an effective fungicide as well as a nematicide that works well on both of those pests, it really works well in increasing yields for our growers out there.
Troy, let's expand more on Levo. Can you kind of break down the benefits that we see from Levo?
Levo is a product that's been proven for activity on both SCN and SDS for a number of years. On average, we see about a 4.6 bushel per acre advantage versus the untreated, where either soybean cyst nematode or SDS is present. And it's a very effective tool. It really provides a very effective area around the root zone, controlling soybean cyst nematodes as well as controlling SDS early in the growing season.
How does BASF work with producers when they're looking at identifying the right seed treatments?
So I would encourage growers to visit with their local agronomist or their BASF representative if they think they've got issues with either of these pests. They can also work with their soybean specialist at the universities in their respective states, but oftentimes they'll discover that they have problems with either one of these pests, and that leads to the next level of management. And as mentioned earlier, Levo is a proven product that's been on the market. We believe that there's growth opportunities for this moving into the future because it provides such good, effective protection against both SDS and soybean cyst nematodes.
I am curious, Troy, what updates do we have from this growing season as far as SCN and SDS throughout parts of the Midwest?
Yeah, so this year has been a really interesting year. Typically we see SDS when we have stress in the spring and more rainfall in the summer and fall to kind of flush that toxin up. We definitely had a stressful spring. We didn't have as much rainfall depending on what geography you were in this fall, but SDS reared its ugly head quite a bit, more than I think a lot of the experts expected. So that goes back to the fact that SDS is becoming a worse problem every year. With soybean cyst nematodes, they tend to reproduce in drier years, and we definitely had our periods of dry or droughty periods in a lot of areas of the Midwest. And so as those SCN reproduce throughout the year, they can get 3 to 6 generations per year, and they definitely had an impact on soybeans as well. I did have some research plots out this summer where I looked at different seed treatments, and SCN, it's really hard to see any symptoms above the ground. You can have up to 30% yield loss before you really see anything above ground. But the one thing I did notice in some of my research plots, since I had those treatments stacked side by side, is I could see earlier canopy closure from some of those seed treatments, such as Alivo. And so as you start to see those differences and you get canopy closure a little bit earlier, we really expect to see some nice yield increases this fall from some of the seed treatments that we looked at.
As growers, scout throughout the year and maybe they make these discoveries, what can they do with that information as they look ahead to 2024?
Yeah, so I think, again, as growers start to think about 2024 and raising their yield potential, they need to determine what the pests are out in the field. Soil sample those fields if they're going into soybeans next year to determine if soybean cyst nematodes are present. There's a lot of good soil testing facilities that they can find on the SCN Coalition website that they can send their samples to, and we've done a lot of work with growers out there as well, and we find that soybean cyst nematodes are present in over 75% of the samples that are sent in, and they're economic in over half of the samples that we send in. So work with your retailer, work with your BASF rep to understand what we can do to help elevate those yield potentials for the growers.
Troy, any final thoughts to pass along to producers as we look at SCN Action Month?
Just be aware as you're planning for next year's crop. Work with your retail, talk with the BASF reps that you have out there. Go to the SCN Coalition website, look at that profit checker tool that they have out there to determine how much yield they may be able to recoup if those pests are present in the field.
You mentioned the SCN Coalition website. What about if producers want more information about Alivo?
Yeah, there's a great website out there called watch-alivo-work.com where they can get a lot of information about Alivo. They can just go to the BASF website as well, and they can find out more current information on Alivo and how it works.
Really appreciate the information and the insights here today, Troy. Hopefully we can catch up again sometime soon.
Absolutely, Brent. Thanks so much. You have a great day.
Again, Troy Bauer joining us from BASF, and I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield Ag News. Thanks for watching.